Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, and we're continuing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I've got an extra exciting video for you guys this evening. The Nintendo 64 core, now that YUV support has been added, is in essence a feature-complete Nintendo 64 hardware implementation in FPGA. The core might not be done, but the feature set basically is. And it's been a long time since we had footage like this on the channel, but this is part of where the core came from. We're going to be talking about where it came from, where it is, and where it's going. But this is a huge milestone that needs to be celebrated, having every single hardware feature basically incorporated within the FPGA core. Now I want you to understand, just because it's implemented does not mean there aren't bugs. It just means that all of the hardware functionality like YUV support is now been added to the core, and in something like Ogre Battle here, before that floor would be completely missing because it uses YUV hardware implementation that's now been added to the core. And of course everyone knows I keep vigor in my sword, if you know what I mean. But now with YUV support within the core, you're getting even more graphics on a handful of games, because while it is a hardware implementation, there's not a ton of games that actually utilized it within their development process. But it is absolutely essential to have it incorporated within the core so you can get as close to one-to-one gameplay on select games as we can possibly get here. And that is totally me in the background there. I am severely clumsy without skis on. I do fall down semi-regularly, it's just part of my life. But all jokes aside, it is wild to think that in under a year we have a feature-complete Nintendo 64 FPGA implementation. And the joke always was that Robert was saying we'd have one retail game playable by Christmas, but what actually happened is in under a year, the Nintendo 64 core went from a concept rattling on somebody's brain to something that you can play today that has all of the hardware functions within the core in and of itself. And that absolutely has to be celebrated. The amount of accomplishment that can happen in that short of a period of time, bringing what was long thought to be the impossible core to MiSTer FPGA, is just absolutely insane on pretty much every front. And with the new updates, Ogre Battle here, at least in the footage I have seen, looks exactly like it should on real hardware. And big thanks to Andy D for helping with some of the captures today that aren't from my library resources, which we'll be going over in just a moment. But again, this is an amazing game. It's an amazing core. It is so much fun. And before you ask down below, as far as the status on this hitting update all, it is still not going to be there yet. What Robert's going to be doing is trying to kill as many bugs as possible before the core actually goes into update all. That way when it does and people do notice small issues, when they open up GitHub tickets, it'll be a lot easier to look at. But again, I have done manual install guides on the Nintendo 64 core, and if you want an updated version of that, just leave me a comment down below and maybe I'll do it one more time, because it is very easy to accomplish. But just look at this footage here. This was only from like 6 months ago, and this is what Super Mario 64 looked like. You had textures, you had polygons, but you had a lot of missing features, and obviously all of the color in these textures here was just completely off. And we were so excited to play the game like this. People did 120 star runs of Super Mario 64 when you can barely even see graphics. Or you move over to something like Diddy Kong Racing, this is what it used to look like. Again, it was just missing implementation in some of the RDP or reality display processor. But when we got this, everyone ran to their MiSTers, we played it, we captured it, we talked about it, and the excitement was there. And that's been the most fun of actually covering this core, seeing all the iterations, bringing them to you guys, and just getting excited, because this isn't even the most recent core, but you can still see the most fundamental changes in things like this. Now another game that got YUV support and utilizes it is going to be Vigilante 8, and you guys did ask for a retest, so I put this in the video here for those two specific reasons. But there are a lot of different graphical modes that the Nintendo 64 core can support because the original hardware can support it, but YUV was definitely not one of those features that many developers actually took advantage of. But because a few games did, it has to be in the core, and now today it is, and that's what brings it over the line as far as a feature complete set is concerned. And I will say, last time we took a look at this game, the audio definitely was not as good as it is now, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. I'll come back and tell you more features of the core and why it's so exciting. But enjoy, because this music's great.
Lightning! That's right. Tantrum!
Sounds awesome, plays awesome, has all the features set. This is just like using a real Nintendo 64, and don't forget with the Turbo core, which we're not even talking about today, you can improve the performance on some Nintendo 64 games, and Robert has mentioned that he has plans to update that core as well, so that'll be fun to talk about when it comes out. But basically now the core is just going to be trying to get more games running better and fixing up bugs that do appear, because again, just because all of the hardware features are implemented in MiSTer FPGA does not mean there are not bugs involved in them. That is the next stage in the development process, finding all of the bugs, understanding why they occur, being able to replicate them and reproduce them. And before you mention that there is not real-time clock support in the core, I totally understand that, but that is on the cartridge for Animal Crossing. It is an awesome game, and there's a lot of ways to play it and keep your date and time without actually having that RTC implemented. It's possible that it might come to the core in the future, but it is not inherently part of the Nintendo 64 hardware design as far as if you're holding a console in your hand. All of the hardware to do real-time clock support for this game is contained within the cartridge, so it really doesn't disqualify it from being feature complete. But I put this up because I knew someone was going to comment and say it's not there and debate me about what complete actually means. But we recently got LOD, or level of detail implementation as well, and that was probably even bigger than YUV as far as games that affects. It used to be that when you walked up to Peach there, that texture would never transition to Evil Bowser, and now that is there, and so many games utilize this particular feature on the hardware. It was so awesome to get this. This was basically the last thing that needed to go into the core before YUV, and it is all here today. And do be aware, with pretty much every single feature, it is toggleable as to whether or not you want it on. Obviously with LOD details, I always recommend leaving that. But this is the stuff that the core used to do, and we were excited to see it. Trying to load up The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask would basically give you this garbage on screen. You could get into the file, select nothing looked correct whatsoever, texture filtering, dithering, and otherwise was not there at all, and when you actually started the game, you would just get a very quick look at Evil Link trying to steal your soul before the screen went black. It was a real fun meme for the core for a while. Or stuff like TLB, the virtual memory address paging system, used to be that it would crash Paper Mario. You get this address error on load. That's because TLB implementation had to come to the core right before Christmas, and once we actually got that, you were able to play all of these games like you would on real hardware. There's so many different functions of the Nintendo 64 hardware, and it's probably more complicated than a lot of other hardware of its generation because it did things completely differently than you would expect. So getting something like this working was another exciting moment, and it's pretty much at least once a month that a new feature was added in 2023, and now in January 2024 bringing more playable games or more impressive games to the core. So getting stuff like TLB again was awesome, and just following the progression of this core was spectacular. And TLB just didn't bring Paper Mario, it brought Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, 2 of the Bomberman games, and a bunch of other titles as well. But there were other things that were done in the background that made things even better. It made Goemon playable here, TLB, and a couple bug fixes when we got one of the best underrated games on the Nintendo 64 in my opinion. And now you can play this game from start to finish, and if there's any bugs, you would be hard pressed to find them whatsoever. And this is where we really got the start. This was some of the first footage I captured from the core. It was basically Mario Kart and Super Mario 64, the first 2 games we were testing, and when we saw this come out of the core, this was highly impressive because even though it's completely corrupted and wrong, you could tell it was Peach's castle. When we look at Mario Kart here, you can tell that this is not what it's supposed to look like whatsoever, but when we saw this running in the core, it was mind-blowing. It meant the progress was being made on Nintendo 64 and FPGA. Now another game that utilizes YUV, weirdly enough, is a baseball game. Some of the features set within the Nintendo 64, especially some of the less utilized things, were utilized in games we would not expect them whatsoever. I don't even know where YUV support would come into play on this game. If you know, leave me a comment down below, but it's another game that was improved by the most recent core, bringing this to a feature complete set. And that's the fun thing about testing these games. Some of them I know like the back of my hand because I played them dozens of times over my life. Other games like this, and big thanks to Andy D for sending in this capture, I have never played in my life. So I've loved chatting with you guys. You leave me comments as to what you see and what you remember about the Nintendo 64. So tell me down below, what's the one game you love on Nintendo 64 that you feel like nobody else has ever heard of before? I would be very curious. But if you want to play another YUV supported game today, this is one that you can definitely check out. Just no clue where the implementation actually comes in. But this is where we started again, looking at this Banjo Kazooie footage here, with no texture filtering, not running at full speed, with all of these polygon seam issues giving us these white lines. This is absolutely not how the game was supposed to look, but we love seeing it run even in this manner. And now with the LOD or level of detail settings put in and so many cores behind it, this game now and the entire Banjo Kazooie Banjo Tooie series on Nintendo 64 is basically as good as real hardware ever could be. And very shortly out of the video, just reviewing one game on the core, talking about how in certain instances this is already better than real hardware in my opinion. And I particularly love that pretty much every single feature that has been added by Robert in the core can be toggled, so you can basically break down all the visual features and get back to something that looks similar to this without the white lines. If you don't want texture filtering, you don't need to have it. If you don't want dithering, you don't need to have it. I love that Robert leaves all the options in for you to articulate whatever image you want. And when again I say this was impressive, I meant it. Super Mario 64 running slow with all of this graphical corruption, textures missing, polygons distorting. When we actually saw this, we were blown away. We never thought Nintendo 64 could run on MiSTer FPGA, and this was good enough for us to be excited about the possibilities. Now today, we have a feature-complete set of Nintendo 64 hardware within MiSTer FPGA. Sure, there's still some bug fixes to come. Sure, some games like Jet Force Gemini still like to crash, but those things will be figured out because now it is cleaning up code that exists and not adding in new features. But I'm going to be doing some more testing videos, including a viewer request, so leave me any comments down below of games you want to see retested on the most recent core, and I'll definitely get to them. But go play Nintendo 64, it is very worth it today, and in some games I already think this is as good if not better than real hardware. I'll be talking about that shortly. But it's a massive day today, we got the whole hardware set. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.